Who are the people that just can't stop themselves from cheating others out of money? Let's get started with number 6. Please don't jump. Ian Mitchell, a con man from New York City, made headlines with his crazy antics during an FBI search. The dramatic incident unfolded as law enforcement officials were trying to serve a search warrant at Mitchell's apartment in the CitySpire condo. Videos and images captured the harrowing scene, showing Mitchell with his legs dangling out of the shattered window while onlookers watched in disbelief. The NYPD's Emergency Services Unit quickly responded, engaging in a tense negotiation. It was later revealed that Mitchell had been involved in a series of fraudulent schemes. He had posed as a wealthy Jamaican heir, convincing unsuspecting victims to invest in non-existent ventures, such as a non-existent bar at the Hudson Hotel and a fictitious hedge fund called INC Capital. Mitchell's scams weren't limited to small amounts. He managed to steal significant sums of money from his victims. One victim, an Air Force veteran, handed over almost all of his savings of $15,000, while businessman Humberto Romero was bilked out of over $158,000. Mitchell used the ill-gotten funds to finance his personal expenses, including student loans, credit card payments, gym fees, and a leased car. Interestingly, Mitchell's ex-girlfriend, Natasha Quiros, showed no sympathy for him during the incident. Quiros revealed that Mitchell had stolen $70,000 from her and her family, something she must have been really sore about considering her attitude. This lack of concern from someone who was once close to Mitchell underscores the extent of the damage he caused to those around him. The successful intervention by law enforcement brought an end to a potentially tragic situation. The officers involved demonstrated their expertise and professionalism in managing crisis situations and were able to end the standoff by rappelling down from the roof and climbing into Mitchell's apartment on the 31st floor. Their quick response and skillful handling of the situation saved a life and prevented further harm. Mitchell was immediately taken to a hospital for a psychiatric evaluation after being apprehended. Number 5. Connected calls. Judith and George Mijarez, an elderly couple from San Antonio, Texas, fell victim to a devastating scam that resulted in the loss of their entire life savings. The couple was targeted by fraudsters who posed as representatives from Apple, Wells Fargo, and a government department. Over the course of 2 days, the Mijarezes transferred a total of $43,500 to the scammers, with a significant portion sent via a Bitcoin ATM located at a nearby food mart. The scam began when Judith noticed an unusual message that popped up on her tablet, claiming to be from Apple customer support. Concerned, she called the provided number, unwittingly connecting with one of the fraudsters. The scammers then changed their tactics, claiming to be from Wells Fargo Bank, and told Judith about alleged charges on her account, including some vile, illicit pictures. Needless to say, the couple was stressed. To compound the deception, the scammers connected the Mijarezes to a third individual who posed as a representative from the Justice Department. This fraudster claimed that Judith's social security number had been compromised and instructed the couple to withdraw their money to keep it safe. They were then instructed to transfer $14,900 to a secured crypto account using a Bitcoin machine located at a nearby food mart. Unfortunately, the couple complied with the scammer's instructions, ultimately emptying their account of $43,500. The Mijarezes, devastated by the loss of their life savings, expressed regret for not recognizing the red flags and warning signs. They had placed their trust in the scammers, believing they were legitimate representatives from reputable institutions. The scam highlights the growing sophistication of fraudsters and their ability to exploit vulnerable individuals, particularly the elderly. Number 4. The Sacred Scam. Juliet D'Souza, a British witch doctor, became one of the most prolific con women in history through an elaborate scam that spanned 12 years. She convinced people to hand over their life savings by promising to fix their problems through a sacred Amazon tree. While initially it was believed she made around £1 million from her scams, new revelations suggest it might be closer to £5 million. D'Souza used various tactics to manipulate her victims into giving her their money. She bragged about curing John Diocles' daughter of cancer, claimed to have connections to Princess Diana, and even offered to introduce a young singer to Simon Cowell. Advertising her services in Tatler magazine, she charged a low fee of £35 for a consultation, but would later demand more cash she claimed would be hung from a tree and used for sacrifices in Suriname, South America. The con woman's scam continued for decades, and she lived a luxurious lifestyle, spending the money on first-class flights, antique furniture, and even a £3,000 Hermes handbag. D'Souza would often brag about the people she had supposedly healed, further enticing vulnerable individuals to seek her services. One of the victims connected to the case was Keith Bender, an osteopath who referred clients to D'Souza in the belief that she could help them. An opera singer named Sylvia Eves gave her over £256,000 to invest in a clinic in Peru and to help with stomach problems. D'Souza also targeted a seriously ill man, telling him that he wouldn't survive the operating table if he didn't hand over more than £10,000. Another woman terminated her pregnancy because D'Souza told her to. D'Souza was also investigated for defrauding Filipino immigrants seeking UK visas, potentially making her another £1 million. Additionally, she has been linked to a police probe involving a care home where her parents resided. D'Souza's web began to unravel when one of her victims grew suspicious after they realized the college she said she attended was made up. D'Souza also claimed she had connections to Princess Diana, but got the name of her sister wrong. So, distant connection. The victim brought their concerns to Bender, the osteopath mentioned earlier, and had referred the patient to D'Souza. At the time, Bender had been paying D'Souza's rent and thus had a key to her flat. So, he went with the victim to investigate. Inside, the duo discovered a monkey, drawings of an evil eye, burned photos, and even a brand new barrister's wig. Obviously, the spectacle was a bit wild and freaked Bender out enough that he refused to even enter one of the 4 rooms in the flat. D'Souza was charged with 23 counts of fraud. After a 5-week trial, D'Souza was convicted on all charges and she was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And she was affixing money as a sacrifice to a sacred Amazon tree. We do something similar, but instead of being cured of ailments, we just get boxes left on our doorstep. Number 3. Tourist traps. A gang of con artists who targeted elderly British tourists in Tenerife in the Canary Islands was busted by a massive police operation. The scam involved smooth-talking con men using aggressive sales tactics to exploit vulnerable retirees. The operation resulted in the arrest of 21 suspects in a massive operation conducted by over 100 police and customs officers in the south of Tenerife. The raids led to the seizure of more than £1 million in cash, as well as jewelry and nearly a dozen high-end vehicles, including Mercedes and Porsches, believed to have been purchased with the proceeds of the fraud. Additionally, 42 properties have been seized and over 300 bank accounts have been frozen. The scammers would approach unsuspecting tourists, often on the last day of their vacation, with offers of discounted electronic devices such as iPads and laptops. They would use persuasive and high-pressure techniques to convince the victims that they were getting an exclusive deal. These tactics included making false claims about the quality and value of the products, offering limited time offers, and creating a sense of urgency to push the tourists into making a purchase. Once inside the stores, the victims believed they were buying genuine products at heavily discounted prices. They were lured by the promise of owning top-of-the-line tablets or other sought-after gadgets. The scammers went to great lengths to appear legitimate, often providing fake paperwork or receipts to convince the victims that they were buying genuine brand-named items. However, the reality was far from what the victims expected. Unbeknownst to them, their credit cards were being cloned, their bank details were being stolen, or they were being charged exorbitant amounts far beyond the agreed-upon prices. Some victims were even coerced into signing direct debit notes or providing their PIN numbers under the guise of completing the transactions. Among the victims was Bridget Manning, a widow who was offered a supposedly top-of-the-line tablet for £150. However, upon returning home, she discovered that her 2 bank accounts had been emptied of £2,128. Another victim, retired travel agent Alan Smith, lost nearly £4,000 after being lured into a store with the promise of a cheap tablet. While 21 suspects have been arrested and significant assets have been seized, the case is still ongoing, and police are expected to appeal to other victims to come forward as they continue to gather evidence. The sales tactics sound a lot like Best Buy, don't they? Number 2. She cared very little. Gemma Laney, a carer from Warrington, Cheshire, was employed by home care provider Direct Health and was entrusted with the care of elderly Frank Green. However, she took advantage of her position and used Green's bank account to indulge in a spending spree on luxury items, holidays, and trips to theme parks. Frank Green's dementia made him vulnerable, and Laney set up an online bank account in his name to carry out her fraudulent activities. She used the stolen money to purchase expensive handbags, watches, and trips, among other things. Laney's excuse for her actions was that she had accumulated an illegal substance debt, although the judge humorously pointed out that her dealer wouldn't be satisfied with a Michael Kors handbag. The judge obviously knew that any dealer worth his salt wouldn't accept anything less than a Coach bag. Am I right, ladies? Laney's activities came to light when a social worker prompted Mr. Green to open a pile of letters that had been left unopened for several months. The letters revealed suspicious transactions in Mr. Green's accounts dating back to May 2017, including payments for Amazon orders, fuel, theme parks, and holidays. Bank statements also showed that the money was used to pay off Laney's balance at a retail chain store. Moreover, Laney canceled Mr. Green's charity direct debits, depriving good causes of his monthly contributions. During the investigation, police found incriminating evidence in Laney's home, including Mr. Green's bank details and PIN number, as well as the Michael Kors handbags, a Tag watch, and a Louis Vuitton scarf. Laney also claimed that Mr. Green had given her permission to spend his money, but she gave no evidence to back that up. Laney's attorney said that she expressed genuine remorse and was the sole caregiver for her son and grandparents. Nevertheless, the judge emphasized that Laney had misused her position of trust in a systematic and cruel manner and sentenced her to a year in prison. And not knocking Michael Kors or anything, but if she's stealing all that money, that's the best she could do? You'd think she'd go with Birkin bags or something. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here for our past release for more heartless scammers. Number 1. Calculated mistakes. Madeline Lovell, Andrew Lovell, and Kevin Brown orchestrated a series of scams targeting elderly residents, ultimately defrauding them of almost £400,000. The trio operated by pressuring their victims into having unnecessary work done on their homes and then charging exorbitant prices for their shoddy craftsmanship. Their scams specifically targeted vulnerable retirees, exploiting their trust and leaving them feeling helpless and unsafe in their homes. The victims were made to believe that the work was essential, and they felt compelled to pay, even though the quality of the work was extremely poor. The crimes committed by the trio came to light following an extensive investigation by the Economic Crime Unit of Cheshire Constabulary. Detectives utilized various investigative techniques, including forensic analysis of financial, telephone, and license plate data, to link the suspects to their fraudulent activities. The investigation revealed that the trio had convinced their victims that home repairs were necessary, even when they were not. An independent chartered surveyor was brought in to assess the losses incurred by each victim. The surveyor's reports indicated that the work carried out by the defendants was of an extremely poor standard, with instances where no work was necessary in the first place. Andrew Lovell admitted to 9 counts of fraud by false representation and money laundering. Madeline Lovell pleaded guilty to 3 counts of fraud by false representation and money laundering. Kevin Brown pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud by false representation and money laundering. The court recognized the severity of their offenses and imposed significant sentences to ensure justice for the victims. Andrew was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months in prison. Madeline received a sentence of 27 months, and Kevin was sentenced to 18 months behind bars. These are some of the saddest and most heartless scams out there. Let's get started with number 6, the Heartless Pastor. Pauline Bryce and her epileptic son had their life savings stolen by Gary and Jamal Soufrant, who posed as pastors selling some land. Gary and his son convinced the 71-year-old Pauline that they had land in Plantation, Florida, and told Pauline to put down $20,000 to get a contract for it. Pauline saw this as an opportunity to get some needed security for her and her son, so she scraped it together, handing over her entire life savings. Pauline had no idea that the pastor who contacted her had been involved in a multi-million-dollar scam of $7 million with his wife. After serving time for this, Gary was back to scam her of her entire life savings while posing as a pastor. At the time, Pauline hadn't seen her own son in weeks and was concerned about him living on the street. The property and plantation would give them both a safe place to stay and ease her stress. Pauline called the police when she realized that she'd been scammed, and they quickly found and arrested Gary. Police were initially unable to find Gary's son and co-conspirator, but Jamal ended up turning himself in a day later. Pauline was happy both men were caught, but was obviously hurt by Jamal, who had once called her grandma and couldn't understand why he'd do this to her. Though both men have been arrested, it's unlikely Pauline will ever see her money again. Number 5. The Heartless Realtor. Richard Troy McConaughey had been homeless for more than a year in San Fernando, having only a picture of his driver's license as a means of identification. One day, Troy received an inheritance check of $73,000 from his grandfather's estate. Planning to turn his life around and get himself off of the street, Troy was excited to cash the check. Troy had attempted to open a bank account on many occasions so he could cash the check, but the lack of any solid proof of identification made it impossible. So he carried the life-changing money for months, hoping to somehow figure out how to get it. Then, Troy met a real estate agent named Allison Renaro, who claimed to be able to help solve his problems by suggesting they open a joint bank account. Since Troy had no other options, thought he might as well give it a shot. So, Renaro got him cleaned up, and in a new set of clothes, they marched into the bank with him. As soon as the money was in the joint account, however, Renaro drained it and left at her first opportunity. Troy had planned to make the most of his second chance. He wanted to get clean by going to rehab and buy an RV so he could get himself off the streets. But all his plans were quickly deflated. McConaughey was fairly well known by residents in the neighborhood he frequented. Gary O'Neill, one of Troy's friends, warned him about Renaro after having met her, expressing that he got a bad vibe. It was also known in the community that Troy was getting a check because he talks a lot, and he'd been warned multiple times. Renaro quit her job while using Troy's money to fund her life. She refused any contact with him, as well as refusing to comment to any reporters, but neighbors have said she's living off the money she drained from the homeless guy. Troy filed a police report, and charges have been filed, but there's been very little movement on the case. Eric Ramsey, Troy's friend, heard what happened to him and started a GoFundMe account. Eric said that he couldn't just watch Troy suffer like that, and something had to be done about it. Now, with more than 600 donors, he has raised about $18,000. Number 4. The Heartless Romance. Cindy Tsai, a Chinese lawyer living in Massachusetts, was diagnosed with gastric cancer not long after getting divorced from her husband of 16 years. Divorce is hard enough in the best of circumstances, but it's even worse when dealing with cancer at the same time. Cindy's ex-husband didn't even show up to support her after her diagnosis or during her first round of chemotherapy, which had the cancer in remission in January of 2021. Unfortunately, in September of the same year, gastric cancer came back and was terminal. Jimmy first texted Cindy in early October 2021, pretending to be looking for Linda, a woman he met at the pet store. Cindy cleared up the misunderstanding, but the two continued talking after learning of their shared Chinese heritage. The relationship blossomed with playful picture exchanges of everything to the food they were eating to goofy selfies. Cindy had found a much-needed companion during her most difficult times, relying on a comfort that couldn't have come at a better time. Cindy was typically a very cautious person, but found herself one of the over 400 victims of romance scams in Massachusetts in 2021. Cindy, at her lowest point, received attention from Jimmy and quickly fell into his trap. Luring her with attention and care, Jimmy pretended to be concerned about her everyday activities and cancer treatment. In the first 10 days of their communications, Cindy was love-bombed by Jimmy, who appeared to be everything she needed, which at that time was endless emotional support. After those 10 days, Jimmy turned the conversation towards money. Jimmy talked about how he moved to the United States and how his family was into the clothing industry in Los Angeles. He also talked about how the pandemic had forced them to close shop. Later, Jimmy moved on to talk about his profession, which was crypto trading, which he said was incredibly successful and compared to Cindy's previous foray into the market of buying and selling real estate. Cindy was hesitant, but Jimmy offered appealing screenshots of his crypto returns. He knew Cindy was also reading about people like Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey and billionaire Elon Musk, who were heavily invested in crypto, so her hesitancy began to dissipate. Jimmy then showed her an online trading market, which was really just a fake site with a similar name and appearance of a legitimate site. Cindy could pull money back out in the early days just to convince her everything was on the up and up. Jimmy even agreed to a video chat, which Cindy said helped calm her suspicions over apparent red flags. But in the end, Jimmy's confidence tricks made it appear that he was helping her become a crypto success by providing loans into the pretend platform, and it cost her $2.5 million. Sadly, because the scammers operate outside the US, Cindy was told not to expect to ever see her money again. Number 3. Cant Buy Me Love. A grandmother, known only as Susie, was relentless in her quest for love. She was so desperate that she managed to get in relationships with 3 men who ended up stealing more than her heart, over 206,000 pounds more, and her house. To Susie, men aren't all they're cracked up to be. Susie first met David, who claimed to be from the UK, with whom she ended up in a relationship. She gave David access to her bank account after he said he needed to buy a laptop. Susie was shocked to find that 42,000 pounds of her father's money had disappeared, along with David. After her first loss, Susie refused to give up on love and went on to have conversations with Johnson Williams. John claimed that he was an American soldier at the war front against the Taliban. John continually pestered Susie with requests for money, so much so that she ended up selling her house to get it to him. She became suspicious when she noticed that her money was being wired to Ghana. Susie had sent Johnson roughly 167,000 pounds. Susie, ever the optimist, was still willing to try for love one last time when she met a Ugandan, Godfrey Kizungo, via Facebook. The two got married in Africa and are still married, but Kizungo had been pestering her constantly for money and Australian citizenship. Susie grew tired of his demands and plans to annul the marriage. In the end, Susie was left with 3 failed relationships, a drained bank account, and no home. She admits that in her longing for a companion, she was desperately trying to buy love and was perhaps a little brainwashed. Number 2. Beta for life. Susan Perry, who was 73 at the time, got into a conversation with a young stranger on Facebook in a bid to search for a boyfriend. Susan had become dissatisfied with her marriage and had gone on a little Facebook adventure in her search for spontaneity that was more than she bargained for. After seeing the younger man's handsome profile picture, Susan was interested in the con man's invitation to chat. Gideon said he had a 14-year-old son named Paul and began feeding Susan various lies about his son's car accidents, subsequent hospital bills, and boarding school tuition in Dubai. Susan was drawn in by Gideon's daily sweet messages and his nice-sounding French accent. She would talk with him for hours on end and called him when her husband wasn't around. Susan loved that Gideon was so genuinely interested in her life. Gideon loved hearing about her hobbies and told Susan he worked on an oil rig, causing him to be away from Paul, who he dearly missed. When Paul was home from the rig, Paul was often at boarding school in Dubai, leaving Gideon alone and lonely. Susan never hid the fact that she was married, but had sympathy for Gideon. She never revealed her chats with Gideon to her husband because she felt that she wasn't doing anything wrong. However, Susan was so drawn in that she would send online boyfriend money whenever he needed it, starting with 400 pounds, which quickly ballooned to 40,000 pounds. The first lie fed to Susan was that Gideon's son had been seriously injured in a hit and run and needed help to fund his life-saving surgery. Quickly, Susan loaned out her life savings with assurances of repayment and even pawned her gemstone jewelry when she overdrafted. To continue to build her confidence, Gideon had offered Susan half of his paycheck, which she rejected, feeling it would be wrong to accept the money at that point. One day, Gideon told Susan his rig had been attacked by pirates and he needed 14,000 pounds to get a helicopter to come rescue his men. Worried, Susan sent him the money and waited in anticipation for word on if everyone was okay, and was relieved to find out they were. Gideon kept appreciating her and called her an angel while promising to pay back everything at the end of his work at the oil rig. Susan had maxed out her credit card to pay for Gideon's son's operation from the hit and run and was relieved when she got a message saying Paul had recovered. Gideon next messaged her that he had been paid and would transfer what he owed the next day. This was good news since Susan had many sleepless nights stressing about how she was going to pay off her card. Susan was crushed the next morning when she received a phone call from Gideon's son. His dad had a heart attack and died. Susan was devastated, feeling like she'd lost the love of her life. After coming clean about the ordeal to her husband and daughter, Susan came to the realization that she had been scammed. Susan made a police report, and after an investigation, said there was no trace of any such Gideon or Paul. Gordon, Susan's husband, said he had suspected that things were falling apart and that he was hurt, but took responsibility for not giving his wife the attention she needed. He said he didn't blame her for falling for the con since these guys knew what they were doing. Susan has since paid off her 7,000 pound credit card loans and bought back her jewelry. She still owes around £15,000 that's going to take more of their golden years to pay off. Number 1. The Heart. TikToker Stephanie Thacker has lived in her car with her dog Millie for nearly a year. She often dropped videos of life in the car with her dog as she searched for a place to rent on Facebook. Thacker's followers were with her every day for months while she toiled away working for DoorDash until she saved enough money to get a place she could afford. Eventually, Stephanie found a place on Facebook and excitedly contacted the owner. The new potential landlord agreed to the place to her and sent Stephanie a legitimate-looking contract. Stephanie sent her entire life savings of over $2,000 as first month's rent and deposit to the landlord using Chime. Once the funds had been received, the landlord disappeared, leaving Stephanie broke. Stephanie showed up at the listing anyway with some hope, but discovered that the property was already rented out. With no place to go, Stephanie camped in her car at the address and called the police to get help. When the police arrived, they told her that it would be a year before she could get her money back. Stephanie quickly reported the case to Chime, with her followers calling the bank app out on social media. Chime's official page responded, saying that they saw cases like this as serious and would investigate. When Chime completed their investigation and found no faults with the transactions, they refused to return Stephanie's money despite screenshots. Her followers were moved by the story and tried to comfort her while telling her to get a new bank, even going as far as reprimanding Chime. As people were comforting her on her page, there was no shortage of comments chiding her for making online transactions with a stranger. There's an entire Reddit forum claiming that Stephanie Thacker is a scammer making up stories to get people to donate money. The Reddit users claim to have evidence that she's not homeless, that she used all the money she received on GoFundMe to buy clothes, and she's continuing to scam good-hearted people online. One user even posted a conversation with Thacker's dad explaining that she's living with a deadbeat boyfriend, that she does have a place to stay, but that the boyfriend isn't welcome. The most recent update appears to show her living in an apartment with her boyfriend and her playing the victim. It's heartless to steal from someone who's homeless. It's even more heartless to scam people who want to help. Chime may have been right. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you think is worse, you yourself getting scammed or your parents getting scammed.